All right, so today we're speaking with the awesome Sonny, who is a online and face-to-face strength coach. I have been watching his stuff for quite a while, and he is very strong and very knowledgeable. So we're going to talk about basically the psychological effects exercise has on you when you're at work, how it increases your focus, your productivity, your overall happiness, and how you can just become a better person overall. If you can, work harder and smarter, you're going to make more money. So listen up. All right, Sonny. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you enjoy doing, what you love, and how you help people.
So my background is in sport and exercise science, mainly exercise physiology. When I moved from New Zealand to Perth, I got into, I worked for a specialist endocrinologist. So I learned a lot from this guy. He sort of taught me a lot in terms of like the body, hormones, and that sort of led me down the path into, what would you call it, neuroscience and neurochemistry.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome.
Yeah, because I was working with such a vast group of people, I sort of had to work out a way of how to, I suppose they were all like, I was working with athletes, but I was also working with like entrepreneurs and like CEOs and people that like just a vast group of people. Yeah. And so I quickly realized, what worked for an athlete didn't necessarily work for a CEO or for an entrepreneur. And, while they all had similar goals of improving like their health, their fitness, and how they performed, how we achieved that goal sort of all looked a little bit different to them. And that sort of led me down the path of learning about the nervous system and like neurochemistry and how our personality, excuse me, how that plays a huge role in towards how we sort of respond to certain things, whether it be training, nutrition, our lifestyle habits, things like this to help, I suppose, optimize ourselves to be able to achieve certain performance in life, whether that be, trying to improve our body or trying to achieve a certain goal in our workplace. It really comes down to sort of understanding who we are as a person, and then from there, our personality, our behavior, and then essentially putting things in place so we're able to optimize how we sort of function to be able to achieve these certain goals.
That's awesome. And that's exactly right. So every single person has a totally different body type. They, attract and act and react very differently to everyone else. So I guess everyone's, training schedules, everyone's nutrition, everything, even like comes down to personality, is completely different and should be completely different. So I'm really interested to know, so you said you've trained a few athletes. Could you give us an example of an athlete's schedule? Or because I'm all about scheduling, and I'm sure like, as a busy person, it's, scheduling is key 100%. So could you give us an example of like, an athlete's nutrition plan and exercise plan or schedule, you could say, compared to like maybe a busy businessman or woman?
Yeah, well, there's not going to be that much difference between them, to be honest, because of these types of, usually they're pretty driven sort of people. So if I could sort of give you an overview, when I look at someone, I want to determine straight away who's in front of me, right? Who is it that I'm talking with? And to give you an example of a CEO and an athlete, they're actually a lot of them, in my experience, are very similar personality types because they're very driven individuals, right? They have very similar goals of achieving success, whether that be in their business, an entrepreneur, or in their sport as an athlete. And so typically these types of people, they're very competitive by nature. Yeah. They love to compete. They actually feel good in a competitive environment. And as a result, they tend to come across quite confident, very confident people, speaking, competing, whether that be, in business or in their sport. And so straight away, I kind of have an idea that these people are more sensitive to dopamine, a neurotransmitter, pleasure neurotransmitter. It's also responsible for motivation, drive. Now, when I say they're sensitive to a neurotransmitter, it actually means at rest, the neurotransmitter is very low. And so their behavior is driven by increasing this dopamine, because anything you're very low in, when it increases, you respond very strongly to it. And so individuals that are low in dopamine, their behavior tends to be driven by trying to raise dopamine. They come across very competitive, very loud. They love social interaction. They're very introverted type individuals.
Yeah.
And this is not entirely, but they tend to gravitate towards competitive things like running a business, like sport.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's
so when we
right.
think of their nutrition, right? Okay, so food we know can build certain neurotransmitters. And so off the bat, we want to know that there's enough protein essentially coming in to be able to build dopamine, because there's an amino acid called tyrosine. And if you favor meals that have protein and fat more than carbohydrates, you will favor the production of dopamine. And so
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they don't need a lot. You don't need to start, they don't need a huge amount, because remember, they're very sensitive. There's actually two types. There's a type 1 who are very sensitive to dopamine, type 1A and type 1B. The type 1A, they're very sensitive. They're the most confident. They're so extroverted. They're very loud, confident. You think of like Donald Trump. He's a good example of type 1. Very driven guy, right? And there's no coincidence why he's been so successful, if you ask me. But yeah, so their issue, the type 1, they're very, these types of people, they're very driven. They have no problems being in this competitive state. Their problem is they can overproduce adrenaline. And so while this nutrition approach of having more protein and fat can help favor dopamine, if they're under more stress, you can use dopamine and make even more adrenaline out of it. So if you're using lots of adrenaline because you're working, training, doing all sorts, and you're running dopamine, adrenaline and low, and you need more, your body will use some dopamine to produce even more. And this is not ideal. They want to make sure that they're not overproducing adrenaline, because that often leads to them crashing, fatigue,
that's
low
exactly
motivation.
Right. Yeah,
You get burnout symptoms that people sort of think of.
totally. Awesome.
And we can all experience this to a certain point. It's just these type 1 individuals, they've got a very high tolerance to it. And so when I think of a type 1, if I'm seeing one, I tend to go, okay, let's make sure we've got protein and fat in a decent amount of meals. But around high stress periods of the day, they want to make sure they're consuming some carbohydrates, because as you all probably know, when we eat carbohydrates, we feel pretty good.
Yeah.
That's partly due to, okay, if we think protein and fat helps to produce dopamine, protein and carbohydrates helps to favor the production of serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that helps to calm the nervous system down.
Also, the balance is really important. Do you agree?
Yes, yeah. And so so balance is a good word, but balance becomes very specific to you. So a type 1's balance may not necessarily look like a type 2, who I'm very much a type 2, and I believe you run more in line with a type 2, adrenaline sensitive. And so the idea of balance, definitely, but it's very, I think it becomes more specific to the person.
Yeah, 100%. All right, last question I have. How can we optimize our training and nutrition to perform better at work?
Okay, so to be able to perform better at work, essentially, okay, if I'm thinking for your demographic of people, you're training busy people, either
people either work long hours or just generally want to be more productive, more focused, have more energy, all that kind of thing.
Many of them will run in. Here's the thing: in general, the population, most of them are going to lean in the middle, which is type 2. They're very sensitive to adrenaline. We feel good on it. So we want a nutrition approach that supports it. But also when it comes to training, because we run so good off adrenaline, again, remember, if you're sensitive to adrenaline, that means you have low levels. At rest, you're pretty chill. You're more introverted. You almost look lazy, procrastinators. That's a type 2.
Okay.
Right? Because what we're doing is until adrenaline's in us, that we act and we start responding. And so when we think about training, optimizing performance, essentially the word for a type 2 is there needs to be, for a type, again, there's two types, there's type 2A, 2B. The 2A runs very well off variety. As long as there's enough variety through the week, and both in their training and their nutrition, it keeps them motivated. As simple as this sounds, it avoids this, like, if you know you get bored easy doing things, that's a true sign that you're more sensitive to adrenaline. And so when it comes to their training, as long as it's novel, fresh, something new and exciting to look forward to, they'll avoid overstressing themselves.
Yeah, right.
And then that then allows them to perform better throughout the day because they're more excited about what it is they're doing.
Okay. So variety is super important. And for just general busy people, like, or, you know, I know you do a lot of strength training. Like, what is 3 action steps that they can take to better their performance in their training, in their nutrition, and in their daily life?
3 action steps.
So keep variety. That's a really good one.
That's important part. When it comes to their training, they don't want to, okay, so we can get in the weeds there, but there's many variables you can manipulate in a workout. You got the amount of weight, the volume that they do, the rest periods and all of that. The type 2A does best with short rest periods because they tend to like that density. They feel good on getting more done in less time. Yeah, and so when it comes to your workout, you want to think, in terms of these variables, they don't want to abuse the work that they do on the workout. They go on there with the goal of either getting stronger, performing more reps, or just having a good performance and then getting out. They tend to work better on shorter, more frequent workouts.
Okay, yeah. And type 2.
Yeah. And so in terms of do you say nutrition as well?
Yeah, so nutrition wise.
Yeah, so they do well typically they do well with like a lower carb approach, especially if they have high serotonin, because if you have a bunch of carbs coming in, it's going to produce even more serotonin. It's going to be very hard for them to raise their adrenaline. So they get very like lazy especially throughout your productive hours. If you know through the morning, you got to be busy and on point. You don't want to start smashing a whole bunch of carbohydrates. Not nothing. You can have smaller amounts, just not huge amounts, because it'll reduce the activation of the nervous system. Okay. And so for a type 2, this is the go-to approach is for their diet after their workout. That's when they have most of their carbs, and in the evening. So saving the carbohydrates for the evening. So basically you're thinking of the high stress periods of the day, the workout, and then trying to recover from their day in the evening is when they're going to do well. They'll do well with, because it'll help favor the production of serotonin when they need it most, which is at high stress periods, post-workout and in the evening.
That's awesome.
Lifestyle, was that the third question?
Yeah, lifestyle. That was basically it. Awesome. So keep variety. I mean, there's 2 different types. We'll put a bit of a summary in the bio in the comments for you guys to read as well. But thank you so much, Sonny. I appreciate the time. I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope you guys have learned a lot too about your body types and different adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin, and the foods you can eat. It's very interesting, actually. So take away from this, implement it, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.